We're live, baby. April Fools.
Yeah, we're recording on April 1st. Wiley had a funny April Fool's thing that happened, so we'll start with that. And then
So I was living in Austin for 3 months, and then I moved back in with my mom. It's just kind of funny actually telling people like, oh, where do you live? I'm like, oh, I live with my mom. And at this point in my life, I'm making the most money I've ever made too.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people will look at me kind of like, oh, he's a bum. I'm like, no, trust me, I'm not. But anyways,
why do you live with your mom? And then you can tell that story. But
yeah, honestly, right now, so I ended my lease in Austin, and it was a great time. You know, we grew the agency. We're having a lot of fun at the same time, cultivating a great group out here. But when the lease was over, I didn't know exactly sure where I wanted to go. And so my mom called and she's like, hey, like, you know, grandma and grandpa are 89 and 90. Like, will you come out to the house and just be a helper? And I was like, sure, that's perfect. Like, be there a couple months and then kind of figure out where to go next. So that's how I ended up there. And my mom's been doing a lot of renovations on her house. So I've been helping her out, you know, throwing her a couple thousand here, a couple thousand there, because obviously I don't pay for rent, but I still want to help. And so the other day, there's this crooked New Yorker that comes and paints our home. But my mom loves this guy, dude. He's
like an old school East Coast, like dirty
yes,
sales
dude. He's
guy.
like a dirty watch. Like he sells you used.
Like a used car sales guy.
Yeah, he's awful, and I don't like him, but my mom loves him. And every time I'm like, Mom, like try to get other bids from different people. And she's like, no, he's our guy. Whatever, okay. So I pay a couple paint jobs, and my mom texts me today, and she's like, I need some money. I'm like, all right, how much do you need? You know? And she's like, well, I need 24K. And I was like, what, dude?
Because you're here too, so you're not there. So you're not with her. Yeah.
And so like my face is shocked, and I start texting her back. I'm like, Mom, are you serious? Then she texts me, she's like, April Fools.
That's great. That's great. You're about to be like, I'm going to go kill this New Yorker guy.
Yeah,
right?
dude. I was like, I'm going to call him right now and be like, dude, for a back porch, $24,000 for a paint job. Like, we're not doing this, man.
That's funny, dude. Well, that's cool. So how you've been doing this business for like 5 years now, almost?
Dude, it's actually my 4-year mark.
4 years
on the 5th.
This will be their 5th year coming up. It'll be
so I'm gonna hit 4. I'm going into my 5th.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. 'Cause I'm going into my 7th year right now. I'll start 7 years in at the end of this year.
At the end of this year.
End of this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your start say like calendar year then.
Yeah, I started the end of 2018. So so I've been doing it 6 years, going on 7 years.
Yeah.
Cool. So this is a very different position than you were when you started, right? Like when you started, were you in college still, or you just had dropped out?
I just recently dropped out of college. And what's funny is I was looking back at my 4-year mark, and I'm like, think about this as a college degree. Like this was my 4-year journey in business. And like I was thinking about everything I learned from communicating with people.
Yeah.
Learning how to be a good leader to myself. Like that's been one of the biggest lessons I feel like as an entrepreneur and running your own agency. The second thing is learning how to sell. Like at the end of the day, I really do feel like any type of position I walk in now moving forward, like I can sell and negotiate deals, and I feel comfortable in that.
Yeah.
So John Shield just bought a car recently, and we go in the car dealership, and you know when they give you the price and you sit in silence and it's like super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Dude, I was just sitting there, and it was me and John. We were trying to work down the price from like 32,000. We were trying to get him to 26. And he kept like going a little bit lower, but he wouldn't budge, and he wouldn't say anything. But me and John just sat there because we both knew like the first one to talk loses. And that's a lesson. The first one to talk definitely loses. And dude, so we sat there for like 7 minutes in silence. But in my head, I'm thinking, I can do this all day. Right. And so can John. And so we worked our way down. It was probably like 45 minutes later of the most awkward silence. And we finally got him to 26.
You got him where you wanted him, right?
Yeah. But no, it was cool because now I'm thinking to myself, like after college, you usually come out with debt. And you know this because of Deb.
Yeah.
Right? And then you go into your career. But I feel like the most applicable skills I've learned is by doing it.
Yeah.
And now, you know, I'm at a point where, you know, money's not a problem, which is amazing. I have a very stable group, and it's cool to see just everything I built. And I'm like, this is my degree now.
Right. When it's like to build the passive income you've built, you'd have to own probably like 150 units, of like rental properties minimally.
Yeah.
Right, to have that much. And it's the amount of capital you would have had to raise to buy that much. So you'd probably have to own more than that because you'd be paying a big mortgage and all that stuff, right? So that's funny. So Deb asked me the other day, I talked about this on Calvin and I did when we do like a weekly, just like BSing on, and we post on YouTube. And we talked about on there, we were like, I told him that Deb asked me, oops, I'll switch back and forth. There we go. So I'm on here too. We're winging it. It's not Wylie the whole time, but so Deb asked me like, hey, do you think that having a business degree would have helped you with your job now? And I was like, no, the only thing a business degree is good for is to work for entrepreneurs. Like the only thing a business degree would help me for would be to like, the only thing business degree is good for is for me to hire people with one so they can be my accountant or do my payroll or like work for me as like an assistant. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I would tell you. So I just had to buy a new car too, cause mine got stolen. Yeah. I was talking on a team call earlier this week. So, and by the way, I had a nice truck. I think I bought it for like 120,000 like 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. I bought it cash, which seemed like a good idea until it got stolen. And then I was like, oh, that sucks. Cause like I didn't have payments, but then when someone stole it, I was like, that was like having $100,000 stolen.
Ripped away from you. From the cartel.
Which, from the cartel. So this time I was like, maybe I'll lease it so that I don't have, if it gets stolen, like I don't really care. Cause I didn't really care this time, but it was annoying cause I'm like, I have to wait for insurance now. But I have one of my friends, Bruce, who works with us, used to be a GM at a dealership. And so people always throw out those high numbers. And then I like put them in a group text with Bruce. I'm like, Bruce used to be a GM dealership for XYZ amount of years, or a GM at a dealership for this many years. He said that your prices were ridiculous and this is what we're willing to pay. And I just put them in the group message. And then I also always tell them, I'm like, I've done sales for 7 years and I manage like 600 salespeople every month. Yeah. And then all of a sudden their tone changes and they're like, okay. And so Bruce is texting. I'm like, hey, we know that you can sell this at 6 over MSRP to make the money you need to make. I talked to my other friends and we'll either get it from you guys or we'll have a car shipped in. And then that's right away. They had it done. I had all the deal done over text, walked in there, filled out the paperwork. I was at the dealership for 45 minutes. No, that's smoothest experience ever.
Yeah, because I know Calvin just bought a new car and he goes up to the salesman. He said, how close are you to your bonus? Yeah. Because it was like the 27th. He's like, I'm 2 cars away. Yeah. He's like, well, look, dude, let's just get down to it. Right. Yeah. And I feel like when you approach them with that type of energy and assumptiveness, they already know who they're dealing with. And so they can just, get down to the nitty gritty. But going back to what you said about buying a home and renting it out. So the average income for a rental unit is right around $900 to $1,200 of passive income. Yeah. And so think about that because you're buying a $300,000-$400,000 house and you're only bringing home and netting, call it $1,000.
Yeah, and you have to put down 5% or whatever. Best case scenario, maybe 20%.
20% for a rental unit.
Yeah. So 60 grand down.
60 grand down to only make $1,200 a month. Yeah. And I was thinking about it and I'm like, think about all the people that go to the gym that are disciplined, that have just gotten out of college. They're stuck in a 9-to-5 job and they want to change. They want to get out of that world. I'm like, how much easier is it to find somebody like that with discipline and they just plug into a system where all you have to do is read a script, get some leads, make the calls, and then you can make, a couple $1,000s a week, right? As long as you follow everything. And I was explaining that to my buddy who's in real estate down in Charlotte. And he's like, it can't be like, he's like, it can't work like that. And I was breaking down the numbers. He's like, dude, I own 5 rental properties and I only make $4,000 some odd dollars from it. Wow. And I was like, dude, you're over $1 million in debt. I was like, just take a look at over here. So slowly and surely, I think he'll open up his eyes a little bit.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think this game is like mostly mental, right? Like you have to get good at dealing with the ups and downs. And that's the biggest change I've noticed myself is like stuff that used to bother me 5 years ago, 6 years ago, like seems like such not a big deal right now, right? Like early on a client would cancel or like my leads wouldn't get delivered in time or like someone earlier was like, hey, I ordered leads for this day and only half of them have come in and he's freaking out. I'm like, dude, like just take a deep breath, zoom out like even a day. You're not going to care about this, right? And that's why I try to always zoom out like, oh, like in a year will I care about this? Yeah. And that's what I noticed like when the car thing happened, I was at the valet and I'm like, hey, where's it at? And the guy was like, we can't find it. I was like, oh, it got stolen? And he was like, well, we don't know that. Like, he's freaking out. I'm like, okay, well, you parked it somewhere. It's not there. Like, it probably got stolen. Do you guys have like a car that could take me to my meeting? Because I had to be there in 15 minutes. And he was like, well, what about your car? I'm like, I'll deal with it later, but I have an important meeting in 15 minutes I got to go to. Like, should I call an Uber, or do you guys have an in-house car? Because it's a nice hotel, right? And he was like, no, we'll take you over there. So they took me over, and they called me a couple hours later, like, oh, it's stolen. I was like, all right, sounds good. Well, I guess we'll get insurance to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
But like, I think a couple years ago, I would have reacted totally differently. I would have been like really upset. Everyone's like, "You're not mad?" I'm like, "Dude, it is what it is. Like, I can't control it. Someone stole a nice car from a 5-star hotel valet." Like,
Yeah,
whatever.
when I called you, you were very nonchalant about it. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, that was a pretty nice truck.
Yeah,
And you were like, no, I mean, dude, what am I going to do? Like, it's out of my control. Now I just have to move on to the next thing. You had to make my meeting. Like, I'll get another car. It's not that big of a deal. And I think living in that headspace has probably been one of the most valuable things for me. Because early on in business, when you get hit with the curveball, you haven't seen it before. So it just completely knocks the wind out of your sails. And that's one of the biggest lessons, just getting back up on your feet, thinking, all right, what can I control? And then also looking at the problem that hits you and be like, how can I get structures and processes in place so this doesn't happen again?
Yeah.
That's been a big thing for me.
What do you think some of the, so 4 years in, and you were 22 when you started?
Dude, I was 20.
20 when you started. Okay.
Yeah.
Because you're 24 now.
Yeah.
Almost. When do you turn 25?
September.
September. Okay. So going on 25. What do you think, like, a few of the, like, things that have happened that have taught you lessons? Like, do you remember a couple of scenarios where, like, this is a bad thing that happened, but I learned X, Y, and Z from it to get to where you're at now?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is what I realized recently was having a strong team around you and a culture. And I know that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but it really is so true, because the only reason why people don't want to leave their job, even if it isn't the best, is because the band of friends, brothers and sisters that they have. Early on, I did not realize that. I was willing to take anybody and everybody, and I had no set standard on who I wanted in my group. And then what happened was there was these negative Nancys that were always pouring just negativity into people's ears and drama over here and always causing problems.
Yeah.
But they put up, decent numbers, so I was willing to allow them in the group. When I decided to get rid of them and say, hey, you can't work here. I don't care about your numbers, but you're affecting our team and our culture.
Yeah.
We did take a hit for a couple months, but then after about 90 days, I would say, that's when we really started to grow, because we were bringing in the right people. And then what started happening was I could lean on Zach, this guy could lean on me, and then we all just started lifting each other up. And that's when the numbers started really blowing up and people started crushing it. And so I feel like that was the biggest lesson I learned.
Yeah, I've noticed that. We just had that happen with someone who, like, had been in the industry for a while that was with us, and like just constant negativity, unfulfilled promises, all the BS that always came from that. I'm like, we're just better off just parting ways at this point, because the people that are left are going to do more without the negative influence that you have over them, right? So why don't we just move on and move forward? I think it's a great point.
Yeah, and you know what else I think is having a good pace.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think this gets talked about enough, because I think you know this very well. Like, our first 2 years in business was go, go, go. Like, if I wasn't working, I felt horrible about myself. And I think there's certain times in business that you have to have that, right? You have to be just pretty much sacrificing everything and just staying consistent the whole time. But this year, I have watering holes. And what I mean by that is there's just things that I have set up where if it's spending time with my mom or going to see my grandparents on a Saturday or like going on a hike with my buddies out in Charlotte, like that stuff fuels me up. So when Monday hits again, I'm ready to go. Yeah. And I've just realized, like, if you have a good, consistent pace, you're never going to lose. But if you compare yourself to the guy that's a couple steps ahead of you, it's like, dude, if you can just outlast people, that's really where you start winning.
For sure. And it's like there's different phases, like you said. Like early on for us, we were in such a like fight or flight type mode where we didn't have the infrastructure we have now. Like we had to work pretty much every day. We were going across the country to sell insurance. I was telling people that the other day and their minds were blown. I'm like, that's such a foreign concept to people, but we used to like get on a plane, fly somewhere, work there for 2 or 3 days, come back, and then do it again in like 2 weeks. And we're trying to recruit people in those areas. Now people are sitting, out there on Zoom or over the phone, selling 3 or 4 policies a day from home. So that structure now allows people to work 5 days a week and work from 9 to 5 and have a more normal schedule. But we were compensated for being early in and got paid well, build big businesses to set up the structure we have now. But people don't have to work 80 hours a week like we had to, right? I think it depends on what time you join a company too. Like we're attracting better people now because of the structure. We were willing to take a risk when it was more of a more uncertain company.
And I like what you said there in terms of you're compensated for the problems that you solve.
Yeah.
Right. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn because there were certain problems where I'm like, I don't know if I can bear the weight of this burden right now. But getting through that, that's when I would always see, income change, the team change overall. But that was something that I struggled with early on. I'm like, the more problems I have, that typically means, one, I'm learning lessons. Two, my agency's about to grow because I'm going to be having to figure all this out. And that was a big thing for me recently.
Yeah. I remember at our convention, Shannon Sharp talked, and like I usually don't take that much out of the paid speakers because I'm like they just kind of talk and it's like entertaining but not that good. But we had David Goggins, who was actually surprisingly good and funny. I think he'll be back next year. But Shannon Sharp said something that he was like, "Don't ever accept anything in a win that you wouldn't in a loss." And I was like, damn, because I remember there's been times where we've got like lax on certain things or let the culture like kind of wane and wax and like not be as strict on it when we're doing really good. And then when things get hard, it bites you, right? So I think now I've learned like, okay, like even when things are going well, like still inspect everything and make sure we're staying tight with all of our standards and procedures so that when things get hard again, you're able to react. And because there's always going to be times of like difficulty in business and times where things go really well. And I think it's just being prepared for both, right? Like put the pedal down when things are going good, but when things tighten up, be prepared and have the skills to, to react in those situations, right?
Was it Shannon Sharp telling the story where he had one of the best games of his season and he was expecting everybody to congratulate him? All his teammates were congratulating him and his coach brings him in the office, says, sit right here in this chair.
Yep.
Shannon Sharp makes a face and he sits down and he pulls up the game film and he goes, you missed this ball. You missed this ball, right? And Shannon Sharp's like, really? And he's like, oh, shoot, I did miss all that, right? But like you said, what was it? In a win, still expect the same thing. In a loss, what was that?
Don't accept anything in a win that you wouldn't in a loss.
Yeah. And I feel like that's where people, just fluctuate a little too much is because when things are going good, you let a lot of things fly. But when they're bad, you tighten up the hatches.
Yeah, it's like that little flywheel thing where it's like hard times make strong men, strong men make good times make weak men make hard times, right? Yeah. And it's like you want to be prepared for, when things are bad. And I think maybe like Joe Rogan or someone said it's like better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war, right? Yeah. And so I think it's always super important to stay mentally sharp, pay attention to things that are going on. Like, dude, I read like the Wall Street Journal and I pay attention to things going on in the insurance industry all the time just for when things change to be ready and be ahead of it. Because you want to stay ahead of the curve, not be reacting. Like there's companies in our business now who still work all their business off of mail. It's like, dude, who opens the effing mail anymore, right? Like you might have people that are 50 and up that still open the mail, but you're literally aging yourself out of the marketplace by being focused only on mail, right? Yeah. Like we were a company that used mailers. And we were talking to someone earlier today and like they're talking to this company that only uses direct mail for their marketing. I'm like, dude, it's not 1995 anymore. Like it's 2024. Yeah. Like everything is online, everything's digital, everything's on social media, Google, YouTube. Like what are we doing? What are we doing using mail still, right? Yeah. And I think about like how much access do you have to people when you're going after that market? Yeah. Because there's probably only maybe 1 million people that will fill out a mailer. But it's like how many people have a Facebook, Instagram, YouTube channel, right? Or not YouTube channel, but they're on YouTube and they see an advertisement that says, hey, do you need some life insurance? A friend or family member has passed away. And what I really like is going back to the real estate thing, there was only what? There's 190 or 175 million people in America that have an account on Facebook. 175 people. And that's what we have access to. Because I had a guy call me the other day. He's like, do you think the leads are ever going to get saturated? I was like, absolutely not. We have 20,000 agents and there's 175 million people that have a Facebook account. Plus there's like 200 or some odd thousand people turning 50 every single day. 160 million have Instagram. Right. And I'm thinking to myself, this is why the industry is so powerful because things like solar, it's the gold rush, right, in the last couple years, but now it's getting very regulated. A lot of those companies have been going bankrupt. And I was reading some articles and I'm thinking to myself,
what are these kids going to do when they've gone hard for 2-3 years? They built something and then it all gets torn away from them. Yeah. And this is why I love life insurance so much, is because it is recession proof.
Right. Yeah, we work with companies that have been around for 175 plus years. They've been through all these things. And someone was asking me the other day, they're like, hey, so why like Medicare gets regulated, health insurance gets regulated? Why? I'm like, well, because those things are required. So the government has to have oversight on them. Things that are not required, like life insurance, they have it regulated to where the companies have to be really financially stable. Like meaning if everyone who had a policy died, the companies have to be able to pay out all the claims, right? Which is way more than what a bank has to have. Banks have to have like 10% of the money available. So insurance companies are super, super stable, but they've also been around for like 175 years. The ones we use have been around for like 175 years, right? Like some of these other industries that are always evolving and changing, like you don't have that stability built in. These companies have been around for 2 or 3 years. Like if the market changes, you're probably out of luck at that point, right?
Yeah. Like have they stood the test of time? Because insurance companies have gone through world wars.
Yeah.
Every single depression.
Yep.
And they're still standing. And what was interesting when I found out when the market crashed back in 2008 and 2009 with real estate and all those banks were going under, they needed capital, who did they turn to?
Insurance companies.
I was like, that's like amazing, you know, and that gives me so much trust in the products and what we do and what we're selling.
Yeah. So what do you think? I know it's been a journey for both of us, right? Like we both had our ups and downs with sobriety, like personal life stuff. And for me, like being able to separate work life from personal life was something I have always had to work on, but I feel like I've done a pretty good job of it. And I haven't drank for going on 3 years now. And I know you've had your ups and downs with that stuff too. How do you think that this business has made it easier for you to deal with those things? And like, what are some things you've learned about yourself through, and then not like insurance in particular, but just through like self-developing, being in business for yourself that's allowed you to have more control over your personal life?
Yeah, dude. I mean, definitely on the sobriety piece, I think when people are looking up to you as a leader, as a friend, as someone that they want to follow, that really takes a toll on you. And at first it was a lot of pressure for me, always having guys calling me, asking me questions when I didn't want to answer the phone. And so early on, I would go and, spend a week and go out with my buddies and be a normal 20-year-old kid and, have some drinks, and I wouldn't be answering the phone. I wasn't acting like an adult or a businessman. But when I decided, no, I'm not going to allow this to be in control of my life anymore, I'm going to pick up the calls. I'm going to be a good leader to myself. And I just had to look in the mirror and go, am I worth following? And that's a question I've been asking myself almost every single day now, is like, am I worth following? All the actions that I put on a day-to-day basis, would I want to follow a guy like that? And some days it's yes, and most of the days they are now. But in the past, it wasn't. And then you also got to think about, what hinders you and does it benefit you? Because at the end of the day, and I don't think people will necessarily agree with me, but I don't think there's any purpose in drinking. I think it comes from a point of insecurity to some degree when you're out at the bar and you're single and you don't have the courage to go and introduce yourself to a girl. What do?
Yeah,
you get some beers with your boys, right? And then you have quote unquote liquid courage. But I decided I don't want to have any more crutches like that in every single aspect of my life. And, for me, it has been a battle. But I've been sober now, which has been amazing, and it doesn't have control over me. So I feel like that's what's been really helpful, is kind of just, and it takes time.
Yeah.
It just takes time, dude.
Dude, one thing I've thought about a lot, you mentioned like people use it as a crutch I think it's because people are so worried about, like what helped me a lot was I had to learn to stop caring what people thought about me. There's a really good book called The Courage to Be Disliked that I've read like 3 times.
Well, I need to read that.
And it's like the whole thing is about like not caring people think about you, and it doesn't give you doesn't give them power over you.
Yeah.
Which I think is super powerful concept. But I read that then when I first stopped drinking, and then I've read that since then twice more. And that I think if everyone could just not care what anyone else thought, because it doesn't really matter. And the people are either like, if something bad happens, people are either glad it happened to you or don't care. Like no one really feels bad for you, right? And people don't think about you all that much anyway. Like an agent was talking to me the other day, and they're worried about some stuff with their personal life and what everyone else is going to think about them and this. I'm like, dude, you think that everyone's thinking about you that much? Like you think everyone's thinking about you that much. They're not. And even if they are, who cares what they think? As long as you're happy, be happy. As long as, and that was hard for me because my mom's a nurse practitioner. My whole family's all doctors. My sister's a doctor. My aunts, uncles, all doctors. Right. So I was very worried what everyone thought about me. And I'm glad that happened though, because it taught me to not care anymore and not be so concerned about it. And now I literally don't care what anyone thinks. As long as my wife and I are on the same page, she's the only person I really care what thinks about me.
Yep.
And then as long as I feel like I'm doing the right thing by our agents, and not that people like me necessarily, but people understand that I'm trying to do the best thing for them and working hard. That's all I really care about.
Yeah, and to going into, we did a personality test twice, and how my personality works, long story short, is I want to be liked by everybody. And so this has been a very big hill for me to overcome and a mountain to climb. And I feel like I lacked being a good mentor to people because it was hard for me to tell them the God's honest truth when they needed to hear it. Because I was like, oh, well, if I tell them this and I really get on their ass, are they going to like me? I'm like, dude, I'm doing them a disservice by not telling them the truth. And so I feel like it's also how you deliver a message. Because if you start with like, dude, like, I care for you and I genuinely want to see you win. So what I'm about to say is not to hurt you, but to help you. And if you can open up the door like that, they're going to receive it a whole lot differently than you just walk in the room and you just start bashing them for whatever they did, right?
Yeah.
And so that's been key, is also how you deliver messages. Like I feel like you and Sean have taught me a lot on that, but how to communicate with people. Because when people are going back and forth and let's say they're kind of talking behind each other's back, what you'll always do is you just get them on a 3-way call.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, he was saying that? Okay, and what else? Okay, cool. Let me call him real quick. And you just merge them in. And I'm like, dude, this is the best way to handle anything. Yeah. It's perfect.
Just make conversation happen. Well, and that's the thing is it's like a lot of people, if you just cut right to the chase and are direct about it, then people like, oh, okay, we can resolve this conflict pretty quickly and then it's over, right? And it's funny because I've had to get, at first, like I just would deal with stuff quickly and like maliciously and be over it. And then I had to figure out how to deal with it more tactfully. And I think, and you could probably speak to this because you worked with me for a long time, but like I know I've screwed stuff up a bunch of times, yelled at people, been pissed off, and lost my temper and all of the above. But I think what I've always tried to do is like I reflect when I screw something up and I call people and I'm like, hey, I've screwed that up and I'm sorry for yelling at you. That was not okay. Like I shouldn't have handled it that way. And I think sometimes leaders are afraid to fall on their own sword. And I'd love to hear how you perceive it, but I always want to admit when I screw up because I don't want people to think that anyone's perfect in business. Because if people think they're perfect, then it's a really hard standard to look up to, right?
I think the power of vulnerability is one of the biggest things, because someone will look at you and see the success and see the car that you drive and how you carry yourself and with the confidence you have. But when you tell them, dude, 8 months ago, 9 months ago, whatever the time period was, I was a complete mess.
Yeah.
I struggled with alcohol, I struggled with X, Y, and Z. And then they start thinking to themselves, I have all those problems too. And he was able to flip this around in 1 year. Why can't I? And I think when you're more vulnerable, that's what allows people to go, why not me?
Yeah.
And if you can get people to that stage, especially early on, because no one believes in themselves. Like we're all our worst critic.
Yeah, 100%. What are a couple of things you would give people if someone's watching and they do sales? Like what are a couple of the biggest tips you can give people for, how to convert just like a initial conversation into a sale and tell if someone's a serious buyer? We can kind of wrap up with that.
Yeah, 100%. I think it honestly boils down to the quality of your questions and how assumptive you are, because you have to understand the psychology of if somebody walks on your lot, for example, and you're a car salesman, right? They're not just walking on the lot to just take a look at cars. So you have to assume the close the whole time. And one of my favorite statements that you taught me is you always end with right, ? Right? Like, hey, I'm assuming you're looking at this car because that one you have over there only gets, 20 miles a gallon and this one's at 34 and that's what you were kind of looking at, right? And it's a statement with the question and it kind of leads them to the next process of filtering out what are the key things that they want in this vehicle? And then we're going to stay on this example. What do they not want? By asking them a high quality of questions, but being assumptive the whole time.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Let's go into the showroom. I'm going to pick out 3 cars I think you'll like. After that, we'll do this, this, and this, and setting the expectation for people. Because if people aren't led and directed the right way, then someone's going to take control. Yeah. And there's always a natural power dynamic between those two people. And so if you don't take control early, then the client is.
Yeah, and I think to your point, it's about knowing when someone's a laydown too, right? Like, so when I was buying my car, there was 2 guys. There was one guy who was a sales manager guy who was a good salesperson. Then there was a GM who was a terrible salesperson. And I connected with the first guy at first, and I texted him, and I'm like, dude, I work crazy hours. And when I'm not working, I hang out with my wife, but I work like 60 hours a week. I manage a bunch of salespeople. So I'd love to get the deal in principle pretty much closed over text and then come in and sign paperwork and leave. And I'd like to take like less than an hour. Mm-hmm. And he's like, sounds good. And then his manager called me and was like, hey man, can you come in and do a test drive? I'm like, I don't even want to test drive it. I've driven a bunch of those cars before. I'm good.
Yeah.
I just want to get the deal done, come in. And so the other guy took back over and was like, hey man, I'll work with you, get it all hammered out. Tell me the numbers, whatever. And the other guy kept texting me. He's like, hey, I'd love to get you in. I'm like, stop. If you keep texting me, I'm not going to buy. So then the first guy, I was like, just let me deal with your buddy. Like I like him better.
Yeah.
And the guy was like, okay, sorry. So the other guy just worked out the details with me, asked, hey, like how much down, blah, 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 all the stuff, right? Where can we get it to? I was like, take the protection package off. We went through the whole deal. And then I was like, cool, I'll be there in like an hour and I'd like to be in and out in 45 minutes. Went in, I didn't even test drive it. I just bought the car, in and out 45 minutes. And I texted him, I'm like, dude, thank you for like listening to what I actually wanted and needed, because I didn't want to be here the Friday night of Easter when my wife and my daughter and my parents and my sister are all in town effing around with the car. Like I wanted to get in and out, right? And so I think I'd love you to comment on this and we can wrap, but like sometimes we do insurance sales, there's people like that. And then the agents go, oh, let me tell you this feature, that feature. Like, this is why it's so important. Like, well, what? And they keep going, even though the client's already bought. Like, what are some things you can pick up on when you know the client's going to buy to where you don't have to oversell them?
Yeah, I think the first example that I see a lot of the times is when somebody has already gone through multiple different agents, salespeople, and has already gone through the process. They know exactly what they're looking for. They don't want you to beat around the bush. And so when people say, hey, look, I've looked at this. All right, for example, I had a client today. He goes, look, I know it's going to be around $300-400 a month. Mm-hmm. I know my age and I know my health. This is the best quote I've gotten. If you can beat it, I'll go with you.
Yeah.
Perfect. I'm like, great. I asked him a couple questions regarding his health. I said, all right, the company you're looking at now is offering $315. We can get this down to $265. He's like, that sounds great. Then from there, we just moved into the next process. This is what I'm going to need from you. This is how quickly we can mail it out. Done. Closed deal in about 15 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the times new agents or people that just haven't had those reps are going to go through the full 30-45-minute process, frustrate that client to a point where they decide this is not the guy I want to work with. Click.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, when you have the ability to have a laydown, take the laydowns, right? Because you should, like, that's just a nice layup. It's going to happen like 20% of the time. Yep. Just take those and win. So
100%, dude.
Awesome, dude. Well, hey, this is fun. Thanks for recording with me. Appreciate everything you do for the team, man.
Always, brother. Thank you.